The bank's name is Dragon, and it is an incredibly large corporation. Working here is a dream for many people, including Gaku. Today is the recruitment day of Dragon Bank, so Gaku couldn't afford to miss this opportunity. However, the interview process was extremely fierce, with about 5,000 applicants, but only 80 candidates will be chosen. It was even more difficult because the interview was conducted by the president, Kokuryu, herself. Soon, it was Gaku's turn, but due to being overly nervous, he made some mistakes and lost points right from the start. Gaku then introduced himself as a computer genius who could hack into any system. However, that wasn't enough to impress Kokuryu, and as a result, Gaku was eliminated. The next person to be interviewed was Haru, a guy with a knack for smooth talking that making the interview panel laugh continuously. However, Kokuryu was the only one who didn't find it amusing. In fact, she thought Haru talked too much and wasn't a good fit for the company, so he was also rejected. However, this would become the decision that latterly she regretted the most. As Gaku and Haru left the company, they accidentally ran into each other. They were overjoyed to realize they were old friends. It turned out that they had once been classmates. Gaku, that being shy by nature, was often bullied. One day, Haru happened to see Gaku being harassed, so he stepped in to help Gaku, then beating up the group of bullies. However, just at that moment, a nearby truck pulled away, causing a security camera to catch Haru fighting. If anyone found out, then Haru would surely be taken to the police station. Grateful that Haru had saved him, so Gaku wanted to repay him. He pulled out his laptop and hacked into the security system, then deleted the footage of Haru fighting the bullies. From that day on, the two became close friends, but after graduation, they went their separate ways. Now, they had the chance to meet again, but both had just been rejected by Dragon Bank. Seeing Gaku's talent, Haru came up with an idea. They shall team up and start their own company. Gaku immediately agreed to the plan, and the two of them decided to embark on their startup journey together. Although they didn't have any concrete ideas yet, both believed they would succeed. The very next day, they got to work. Each had $200 in capital. While Gaku was still unsure how to use the small amount of money, Haru had already bought a new chair, which left Gaku wondering where Haru got the money for it. Haru responded that it was their $400 combined, and he considered it a necessary investment since a computer engineer like Gaku needed to work comfortably. It was at this moment that Gaku realized how much Haru cared for him. Haru then suggested they would go raise capital and use that money to launch their startup. However, this turned out to be far from easy. They approached many investors, but all rejected them, as no one was willing to invest in two individuals who didn't even have a clear goal, that putting their startup plans into a deadlock. At that point, Haru remembered someone and quickly led Gaku to meet that person. It turned out to be none other than Kokuryu, who was playing billiards at the time. Kokuryu looked down on them for daring to come to her for investment, but Haru's communication skills were highly professional. He negotiated with Kokuryu and assured her that investing in them would definitely be profitable, and with the right amount of money, they would multiply it exponentially. Hearing this, Kokuryu became slightly interested, but she still wanted them to prove something. At that moment, Haru said that with his skills, he would blindfold himself and clear the billiards table with just one shot. If he succeeded, she would have to invest in them. If he failed, then both he and Gaku would leave and never return. At that point, there were still 5 balls left on the table, and clearing them with one shot seemed impossible. Kokuryu accepted the challenge. Haru took off his tie and blindfolded himself, focused all his attention on the cue ball, finally taking the shot. One by one, the balls dropped into the pockets. Only the 9 ball remained on the table, but the cue ball was slowly rolling towards it. If the 2 balls touched, the 9 ball would definitely drop, that leaving everyone holding their breath in suspense. In the end, Haru managed to sink all 5 balls. It was now Kokuryu's turn to keep her promise. She ordered her subordinate to bring out a suitcase, and inside it was 100 million yen. Kokuryu proposed a deal where the 100 million yen would be exchanged for 51% of the company's shares. This left Gaku and Haru, who had just been celebrating, immediately shocked. With 51%, Kokuryu would become the head of the company, and with only 49%, that they would essentially be her servants. This was unacceptable, so the two immediately stood up and left. Although they failed to secure the investment, they were still in high spirits and decided to go out drinking together. Unexpectedly, during this time, they overheard some information that Dragon Bank was about to host a competition about security. According to Gaku, this competition would gather many famous hackers from around the world, and winning first place would attract the attention of numerous large companies. Recognizing this as a great opportunity, Haru urged Gaku to participate. Haru was confident that with Gaku's skills, he would win, then opening up a big opportunity for them to start their business. However, Gaku hesitated, as knowing that his abilities were still lacking. Without waiting for Gaku's response, Haru went ahead and registered him for the competition. Not long after the qualifiers began, while Gaku was fighting alone, that the other teams had a formidable number of members. He would have to surpass 1,000 competitors to rank in the top 12 and advance to the finals. finals. The competition rules were simple. There would be questions for everyone to answer. Those who provided the correct answers would earn points, that with more difficult questions earning higher points. The 12 teams with the most points would make it to the finals. At first, Gaku was doing quite well, answering questions correctly and steadily climbing up the rankings. However, he was still far from the top spots, and at this rate, he feared he would be eliminated. Just then, Haru returned after going outside and surprised Gaku by bringing in 100 amateur hackers who were there to help him answer the competition questions. This made Gaku overjoyed, and he quickly got back into the competition. Thanks to the assistance of the amateur hackers, Gaku's ranking began to rise dramatically. Before long, he had climbed to 35th place, but it still wasn't enough to secure a spot in the finals. Time was running out, and Gaku had no choice but to take a gamble by choosing the hardest question. If he succeeded, they would break into the top 12. The atmosphere was extremely tense, and Haru didn't even dare to watch. Haru had to go up to the rooftop to wait for the results. Not long after, Gaku also stepped up. As expected, he had successfully passed the qualifying round, which made the two of them extremely happy. However, the competition was not over yet. The final round was held right inside Dragon Bank, bringing together the 12 best hacker teams in the world. Among them was Dragon Bank's T, which is the top contender for the championship. Meanwhile, Haru's team consisted of only one member, Gaku, and at that moment, even Haru was nowhere to be found. The organizers then announced the final round's rules. Each team would be given a fortress worth 10,000 points, and their task was to hack and attack the opposing fortresses. By the end of the competition, the team with the most points would win. Kokuryu appeared shortly after and officially declared the competition open. But just then, Haru surprisingly arrived, dressed as a Taoist sage with a magic feather duster in his hand, leaving everyone confused as to what he was trying to do. Haru approached Gaku, then telling him to access the network 1 minute after the competition began. After that, he went straight to the stage and started performing strange incantations unceasingly. But in some miraculous was under Haru's spell, none of the other teams could access the network, that leaving them utterly confused. As per Haru's instructions, Gaku waited until after the first minute to connect to the Wi-Fi, and sure enough that he was the only one able to access to the internet. He then began attacking the fortresses of the other players. At this point, a man in the audience realized that Haru was up to something. Haru's feather duster was made of tinfoil, so by waving it back and forth, that he would block the signals. The reason only Gaku could connect was that Haru had set up a separate Wi-Fi router hidden behind a bouquet of flowers to avoid detection. Haru had deliberately configured this Wi-Fi to activate 1 minute after the competition started, which prevented the other teams from accessing the network. By the time they were able to connect, Gaku had already surged into the lead. However, since Gaku was working alone, so he quickly started to lose ground. Then his ranking dropped rapidly, soon putting him at the bottom of the leaderboard. This severely dampened Gaku's morale, and it seemed their team had no chance of winning. But Haru had another plan. As the time neared the end, Haru told Gaku to connect to the organizer's Wi-Fi. After that, Haru changed the password to his Wi-Fi, causing all the other teams to lose their connection. Taking advantage of the situation, Gaku launched continuous attacks, and their team's score skyrocketed. At this point, the other teams didn't have enough time to reconnect, and as a result, Gaku and Haru's team won in a spectacular fashion. This left Kokuryu deeply impressed, not because of their skills, but because the two were so clever. It was only now that she realized she had let two talented individuals slip by, so she sent them another offer, 200 million yen for 51%. However, Haru still paid no attention to it. It was precisely because of their brilliance that the man from the audience approached them. His name was D.R.A.M.A, who was the owner of a multinational company, and he made them an offer, 30 million yen for 15% of their shares. This was the deal Haru found most agreeable, as they would have the money without losing control of the company. But D.R.A.M.A had one condition. Within 1 month, they had to make 3 million won, or he would withdraw his investment. Yet Haru didn't seem worried at all. When they got the money, Haru immediately took a selfie, as he already had a plan in mind. The two of them would start an online business, and showing off the money was a way to attract customers. However, when Gaku asked what they would be selling, Haru didn't know yet, but he had his own method. Haru took Gaku to recruit staff, and the applicants would be the ones answering Gaku's questions. Of course, the recruitment process wasn't easy, as no one met the criteria they had set. It wasn't until Takahashi showed up that every question was answered fluently, and more importantly, that aligned with Haru's team's expectations. So they decided to hire her directly for the position of director. On her first day, Takahashi was surprised to find out that their office was Gaku's house. Nevertheless, she didn't complain, but instead was determined to help Haru and Gaku grow the company. At that point, Gaku told her about the investor's condition, that they had to make 3 million yen within a month, and asked if she had any ideas on how to achieve that. Takahashi then came up with an idea. They would create an AI machine that specializes in suggesting birthday gifts for customers. As long as customers place an order, then they will sell that item. This was truly a clever idea, so the three of them immediately got to work. Haru and Takahashi would go out to find and collaborate with souvenir shops, while Gaku stayed home to program and create an AI machine to assist customers. After 3 days of tireless work, Gaku finally finished it. However, when Haru checked it, it didn't quite match the original imagination. What Gaku created was a rabbit figure to replace a human form. But that time, they had no time to make changes, so they had no choice but to let Takahashi handle the customer consultations, with the robotic rabbit repeating exactly what she did. They named it Rin Rin. This was Takahashi's first time speaking in front of a camera, so she was a bit nervous. But surprisingly, this awkwardness caught the attention of social media. Very quickly that the robotic rabbit became famous and attracted a lot of attention. Customers started messaging at all hours, so Takahashi had to provide consultations everywhere, even while out on the street or in the park. By the end of the first week of business, everyone was anxiously awaiting the revenue results. But when they found out that they were all disappointed as they had only earned 49,000 yen in the entire week. At this rate, they wouldn't be able to make 3 million yen in time. However, the three of them remained undeterred. They worked together to find a solution. At this point, Haru believed that their low sales were due to the lack of a specific product, so they decided to focus on selling popular items. Drawing from her experience working in a flower shop, Takahashi knew that men often feel hesitant to buy flowers for their loved ones. Therefore, if they offered consultation and delivery services for flowers, that they could potentially succeed. With no other option, they decided to give it a try. Being a woman who understood the psychology of customers very well, Takahashi provided enthusiastic consultations. Initially, they received an order from a guy wanting to send flowers to his idol. The bouquet was so well received that the idol took a photo and posted it online to express her gratitude, which led many people to inquire about where he had bought such beautiful flowers. Once they learned the shop's address, numerous customers flocked to Haru's online flower store. Gaku found himself overwhelmed with orders, and the business truly began to flourish. As the first month of sales came to an end, the three of them waited anxiously for the revenue results. This time, they succeeded with total sales exceeding 3 million yen. This brought immense joy and happiness to the three of them. When they received the results, Kadoin was also very satisfied, and he gave them a reward by directly introducing them to his superior. Yo was interested in signing a contract with Haru's company, but she had a challenge for them. Within the next month, they had to achieve sales of 20 million yen. This left all three feeling quite anxious, but Haru cheerfully accepted the challenge, even expressing gratitude to Yo for giving them this opportunity. However, when they returned, that the other two voiced their objections. Takahashi argued that achieving such a goal was unrealistic, pointing out that her own shop took an entire year to make 20 million yen, and selling that much in a month seemed impossible. To meet this target, they would need to sell at least 60 bouquets a day. Yet Haru had his own plan. He and Gaku would apply for jobs at a bar where young people often gathered to socialize. They intended to serve drinks and then promote their flower shop to the clientele. However, nothing came easily. On his first day at work, Gaku had water poured over his head by customers, and he was even beaten by some wealthy young men. Fortunately, just at that moment, Haru appeared. He easily drove the thugs away, then successfully rescuing Gaku. From then on, their work serving drinks went very smoothly, and their advertising for the flower shop was also highly successful, that leading to a rapid increase in customer purchases. Takahashi found herself so busy advising clients that she hardly had a moment to rest. However, reaching the 20 million yen target still seemed far off, which left the group feeling quite stressed. Nevertheless, they didn't give up and continued to improve the quality of the bouquets. Gaku meticulously designed the arrangements on the computer to make them truly perfect, hoping to attract even more customers. As a result, flowers were constantly filling the bar, and Takahashi was overwhelmed with orders. Orders are always flooding in, needing them to process. Before long, a month had passed, and it was time for them to review their sales. When Gaku saw that they had surpassed 20 million yen, he burst into tears. Unbelievable that they had achieved this milestone. The three of them celebrated together and then went to inform Kedoin's boss. Yo was very pleased to see their results and impressed by their determination, so he agreed to sign the contract. Thus, Haru and Gaku's company was officially established, named the D.R.A.M.A, with an initial investment fund of over 100 million yen from Mrs. Yo. However, before they could fully celebrate, then trouble arose. The Dragon Bank launched an AI machine that officially declared war on their company, intending to use its reputation and wealth to crush them. This shocked Haru, as he never thought Kokuryu would be so treacherous. Yet this was not enough to defeat Haru's resolve, as he devised a plan to overcome the Dragon Bank. Haru discussed with Gaku and Takahashi, and stating that it was time for the D.R.A.M.A to enter its next phase. That is a decisive step for the success of their company. From now on, they would would no longer sell flowers. Instead, they would launch a live game show where participants could win prizes. In other words, Haru aimed to transform the Trillion Game into a gaming company. To achieve this, they needed more personnel. Haru suggested they take the 100 million yen and buy a gaming company, then develop it according to their vision. Immediately after, Haru and Gaku set off to negotiate the purchase of a company. But it wasn't as simple as just buying. They faced many rejections from various companies. Nevertheless, the two did not give up and continued to tirelessly negotiate with both large and small companies until they found a team that specialized in programming games for major firms. However, this team was currently facing difficulties and at risk of dissolving. Haru saw potential in them and promised to invest money. He asked them to focus on creating a high-quality game capable of competing with the hottest titles on the market. Under Haru's persuasive words, the team began to waver, and they eventually agreed to join Haru's group. Soon after, they moved their office to a place where Haru had exchanged money to rent. Upon seeing the spacious office, everyone exclaimed how beautiful it was, and even Gaku couldn't believe he would be the owner of this place. That all things was all thanks to Haru. At this point, they also began to make discussion and decided to create a fresh genre of game called Survival Island. Immediately after, everyone got to work. It wasn't long before their company organized a launch event for their game, which attracted a large audience. Unexpectedly, Haru surprised everyone by not only introducing the company's debut game, but also announcing a very famous character, Hori. He is a brilliant game producer that every company wanted to have. During the speech, Hori declared that he would now collaborate with the Trillion Game Company. That left everyone astonished and puzzled about how Haru could manage to convince Hori. However, what no one realized was that Hori was just an impersonator hired by Haru. He's just a regular person posing as the renowned producer. This clever deception successfully fooled everyone, and as a result, the Trillion Game Company managed to successfully fundraise 2 billion yen in investments. The survival game was merely a starting plan of Haru. He intentionally announced the development of a new game to gather funds, while his real ambition was to build a media empire that capable of overshadowing the Dragon Bank. Upon discovering the truth, Gaku was shocked. He never expected that his friend harbored such great ambitions. Soon after, Haru approached Kedoin, proposing that they collaborate to dominate the Japanese entertainment industry. However, Kedoin showed no interest in this deal, leaving Haru to leave dejectedly. The next morning, Takahashi rushed to the company, urgently pulling Gaku aside to talk. She discovered that the 2 billion yen investment they had just fundraised had been completely withdrawn, and she suspected that Haru was behind it. Therefore, she insisted on confronting him. However, Gaku stopped her and admitted that he was responsible for the situation. He had realized Haru had been lying, but lacked the courage to intervene, which had led to this mess. Nevertheless, Gaku was determined to continue with the plan, which to develop a game capable of reaching a global audience, even without Haru. He returned and revealed everything to the team, which left everyone deeply disappointed because of having been deceived for so long. Yet the blonde-haired members still thanked Gaku for bringing the truth to light. This motivated Gaku even more. He wanted to build the Trillion game become actually develop alongside everyone here. His sincerity moved everyone, and they agreed to help him realize that dream. Meanwhile, Haru approached Kedoin once again, but this time, in addition to the 2 billion yen, he brought a surprise: evidence of a murder case in which Kedoin had stabbed someone and then fled. This secret had been hidden until now, but somehow Haru managed to uncover it. He threatened Kedoin, insisting that he cooperate or he would expose the incident. Kedoin was cornered and had no choice but to team up with Haru. On the other side, Gaku hacked directly into the game development system of the Dragon Bank, not to steal ideas, but to help them upgrade and fix the system to prevent others from infiltrating it. The next day, Kokuryu was shocked when she discovered this. While the company had no idea who was behind it, she immediately suspected Gaku. However, she didn't know why he would do such a thing, that leading her to call him directly. She asked to go on a date with him, which left Gaku utterly surprised. He could hardly believe what he had just heard. Nevertheless, he daredevilly made his way to the meeting location. He unexpectedly thought that Kokuryu had actually appeared. This was an amusement park. They had played many fun games together. This was the first time Kokuryu had experienced such joy, and the two of them lost track of time, playing from morning until late at night. While riding the carousel together, Kokuryu finally brought up the topic. She asked if he was the one who had infiltrated the company's system, which caught Gaku off guard and left him unsure how to respond. Although he didn't respond, Kokuryu already knew the answer. She moved closer to him and asked if he wanted to work for Dragon Bank, which had been his dream in the past. However, Gaku declined the offer. Nevertheless, to express the gratitude, Kokuryu gifted him all the information about her company's game developers, which made Gaku extremely happy as he could now invite the developers to work for him. The very next day, Gaku and Takahashi went to negotiate with him. Unexpectedly, that the game developer demanded an exorbitant salary, as high as 180 million billion yen per year, which Gaku's company couldn't afford. This made the prospect of hiring the developer seem out of reach. But just at that moment, Haru suddenly appeared and helped Gaku negotiate with the other party, successfully signed the contract with the game developer. Afterward, the two friends sat down to talk. Haru apologized for neglecting the company during this time, and said that now they would rebuild together. Gaku would continue to lead the company in the direction of game development, while Haru would handle the company's media promotion, ensuring the AI could fully utilize its strengths. However, when Gaku asked about the missing 2 billion yen, Haru kept dodging the question. The truth was that Haru had used the money to purchase another media company to motivate the game Gaku was about to launch. The next day, the game developer arrived at their office. Kaizo quickly presented his ideas and started working with a blonde-haired colleague. The work atmosphere was lively, and even though everyone worked late into the night, that no one complained, because they knew that as long as they worked hard with passion, success would surely follow. However, the chairman of Dragon Bank, who was also Kokuryu's father, turned out to be an incredibly devious man. He released his newest game, using his overwhelming media influence to completely overshadow Haru's group's product. Moreover, he had previously met with Kaizo, threatening him that if he continued working for the Trillion Games company, he would teach him a lesson. Because of these threats, Kaizo requested to withdraw his contract from Haru's group and return to participate in Dragon Bank's game launch event. Seeing this, Haru and Gaku chased after him, urging Kaizo to continue working with them to create a game that could truly touch people's hearts. They even offered him 3% of the profits if they succeeded. It was a considerable amount. However, Kaizo still refused and turned to walk away. Inside, the Dragon Chairman was giving a presentation to launch the new game. Then he introduced the person who created the game, that causing curiosity among the audience. Kaizo slowly stepped up to the stage. He thanked the Dragon Chairman for giving him the opportunity to stand there. At that moment, Kaizo saw Haru and Gaku standing below, and the words of persuasion from the two of them flashed through his mind, causing him to waver. So, in the decisive moment, Kaizo changed his decision. He resigned directly on stage at Dragon Bank and announcing that he would join Trillion Games Company. This made Haru and Gaku, who were watching from below, incredibly happy, and everyone else at the company was deeply moved when they heard the news. Meanwhile, the Dragon Chairman was so furious that his face turned red, and he left without saying another word. This was only a small victory for Haru's group, because soon after, Kidoin and Haru successfully acquired a massive media company with influence that could rival Dragon Bank. At this point, Trillion Games had all the necessary factors to thrive, and their mission now was to work together to reach success. Sure enough, that not long after its release, their game became wildly popular, and could even see people playing it everywhere on the streets. It could be said that their game was on par with Pokemon in 2016. After just 1 week, there were 700,000 downloads, and this was the moment they started making money. They did so by offering promotions when players deposited money into the game, and each spin would reward an extra spin. The more money players deposited, the more they received in promotions. This strategy perfectly targeted the psychology of players, making them continuously deposit for it, and as a result, the company would generate massive profits. Before long, Trillion Games reached the top of the download charts. It surpassed Dragon Bank's game and achieving a record-breaking revenue of 5 billion yen. This made everyone incredibly excited, as each of them had now become millionaires. Meanwhile, the Dragon Chairman was furious, but this was only the beginning of his downfall. As Haru had an even bolder strategy, he decided to invest all their profits into launching a TV channel called Trillion TV, which would include all sorts of entertainment, of cooking shows and game shows. This was a groundbreaking move that no private company had ever done before, not even Dragon Bank, because if too many viewers tuned in, then their servers would crash. But the Gaku had anticipated this and worked through the night without rest to transfer all the server data to the cloud system. It ensured that the system wouldn't be overloaded and cause interruptions. Unexpectedly, Dragon Bank immediately retaliated by signing a deal with a foreign company. He determined to crush Haru's Trillion group. Turning the situation around was extremely difficult, but for Haru, nothing was impossible. To create a high-quality program that would attract viewers, they needed a top-tier news anchor, and in Japan, no one could surpass Nagase's expertise. So, Haru and Gaku personally went to find him. Although highly skilled, Nagase was currently working for a small broadcasting station. The reason for this dated back to several years ago, when he was still working for the national television station. During one incident, the station deliberately broadcast false information just to please its sponsors, but Nagase, that being an honest man, couldn't stand such deceit, then quit his job. Knowing this, Haru invited him to join the Trillion group. Haru promised that they would never distort the truth, and that they would bring his name back to the top once again. So Nagase agreed to sit down for negotiations, and accepted the offer to join Trillion TV. Now now they could start producing their programs. Very quickly that the first episode was released, and it was an overwhelming success, receiving a flood of praise from viewers on social media. This was a huge victory for them, making everyone incredibly happy. And sales thanks to that was also skyrocketed. In no time, the company had generated 215 million yen. However, Dragon Bank was not about to ignore this easily. They swiftly struck back by announcing a partnership with major television manufacturers. Their channel would be integrated as a button directly on the remote control. This would expand their channel's reach globally. Their goal was to become the top online channel in Japan within the next 3 years. Not only that, but Kokuryu personally sent a direct challenge to Trillion TV. This left everyone stunned and anticipating an intense battle ahead. At this moment, news about the two companies dominated the headlines of all newspapers. So Trillion TV had to quickly come up with a strategy to respond. At this moment, Haru came up with an idea. If Dragon Bank chose to partner with television manufacturers, then they would approach the most famous manga publisher in Japan. Then they would seek an exclusive deal to broadcast their most popular series. If successful, they were sure to win big. However, when the three of them arrived at the anime company's headquarters, then they discovered that Kokuryu was already there. She had jumped ahead of them and had already signed the contract in first step. This meant that Trillion TV had almost lost this battle. Haru cornered and had no choice but to seek out Kokuryu, then beg her to cede the anime company contract. Unexpectedly, Kokuryu agreed, but with on one condition: Haru and Gaku would have to become her slaves, doing whatever she commanded for the rest of their lives. Naturally, Haru couldn't accept such terms, and the negotiation ended in a complete failure. On top of that, the president of Dragon Bank approached Kidoin and offered a partnership. If Kidoin agreed to Dragon Bank's advertising contract, he would be given shares in the bank. This would mean Kidoin would have to terminate his collaboration with Haru's company. This made Kidoin deep in thought about his decision. He went back and discussed Haru about the offer, but Haru simply said that if Kidoin felt it was beneficial, he was free to take the deal, as Haru wouldn't force anyone to collaborate with him. At the same time, the president of Dragon Bank also received news that Kidoin had declined the partnership offer, which left him in complete surprise. It turned out that Kidoin still wanted to gamble on the Trillion Games company. The next day, Haru and Gaku once again visited the anime company and hoped to convince them to cooperate. But just like before, the manager flatly rejected them. This manager was also very talented, having helped the director build the company from the ground up. However, she had never been truly recognized there. She had submitted many of her own works for approval, but none had ever been accepted. At that moment, those works still remained untouched, with one of the most notable being the story The Maiden on the Windy Hill. Upon learning this, Haru expressed his desire to adapt the story into a film. This surprised the manager greatly, as no one had ever suggested releasing one of her works before. So, she handed over the story to Haru, although they couldn't secure a contract with the anime company, but they still achieved a small success. Immediately after returning, Haru arranged for a team to read and revise the story to quickly proceed with adapting it into a film. The next day, a press conference was held. Haru announced to the media that he would be collaborating with the anime company to release the movie The Maiden on the Windy Hill within 6 months. This shocked everyone, as it seemed impossible to produce an animated film so quickly. However, Haru then introduced Gaku on stage. Then he handed over the next part of the presentation to Gaku. Gaku introduced himself and revealed that he had developed an AI software that would allow them to create beautiful scenes much faster than usual. As a result, Trillion TV would be able to meet the film's release schedule. Some people raised concerns that by collaborating with Trillion TV, the anime company might breach its contract with Dragon Bank. Then the company would have to pay a significant compensation fee. Hearing this, Haru immediately stepped forward and declared that Trillion TV would cover that expense. This stirred up quite a commotion. Meanwhile, Kokuryu, who sitting in the audience, was furious that Haru had snatched away her partner and stormed off in anger. In this way, Haru successfully snatched the contract from his rival. This helped Trillion TV become the exclusive distributor of the anime film. With this contract in hand, Trillion TV also succeeded in convincing the 4 largest TV manufacturers in Japan to add a button for their service on remote controls. This left Dragon Bank at a complete disadvantage. The bank's chairman, that unable to bear it any longer, so he arranged a meeting with Haru's team. At the meeting, he proposed buying Trillion Game for 70 billion yen, but Haru immediately rejected the offer. This enraged the Dragon chairman. He threatened and said that he viewed himself as the bank in this game with massive capital reserves. If the battle continued, that victory would inevitably go to the one with the most money. Therefore, the best option would be for them to become a subsidiary of Dragon Bank. Unexpectedly, that Haru burst out laughing and told the chairman that he should consider becoming his subsidiary first, because sooner or later Trillion Game would swallow him up anyway. Hearing this, the Dragon chairman was furious. No one had ever dared to speak to him in such a way before. He had not anticipated that Haru's team would be so bold as to accept his declaration of war. Despite of risky that Haru had his own strategy. Based on his research, he knew that cash was the primary payment method in Japan. Now they could create a website that would allow customers to use credit cards, which would be a highly promising plan. However, firstly, they needed to partner with retail stores nationwide so that D.R.A.M.A could act as an intermediary between buyers and sellers. Indeed, that this approach proved effective, as many customers began downloading and using their payment app. However, at that moment, the revenue was only at a normal level, which left Gaku and Takahashi feeling anxious. If this situation continued, they would not have enough funds to maintain the project. Just then, Haru approached and said he had a solution. In Japan, most people travel by train, and the payment method is typically through swipe cards. However, this can be quite costly for train operators, as they incur additional expenses for issuing cards. If their company could partner with train stations now, integrate train cards with the online payment app, then it would be a turning point. It would save money for the train operators and provide great convenience for customers, as they would no longer need to carry a card when traveling. To quickly implement this, they immediately went to the train office. Unexpectedly, that they encountered Kokuryu once again. It turned out she also recognized the potential of this online payment method. However, after hearing the proposals from both Haru and Kokuryu, the train operator showed no interest. He directly rejected both offers. That day, Haru went home deep in thought. He tried to come up with a way to secure this business opportunity. He then directly contacted Kokuryu to request a meeting, but in reality, he wanted to persuade her to collaborate. If both companies joined forces for this deal, that it would undoubtedly benefit both sides. Surprisingly, after some contemplation, Kokuryu agreed. When Gaku heard this news, he was equally astonished, as the two had previously been in constant rivalry, and now they were ready to cooperate. The next day, they visited the train operator once more. The mutual benefits they could offer made it impossible for him to refuse. The shareholder meeting for the train company quickly took place, and as they had anticipated, the project was approved. From this point on, D.R.A.M.A and the D.R.A.M.A company would be on the same front. However, this news quickly reached the ears of the D.R.A.M.A president. He could not accept his daughter's actions. He devised a plan. Soon after the trillion-yen gaming company received information, the train operator had decided to terminate their contract and only cooperate with D.R.A.M.A. This surprised everyone. Furthermore, the entire company system reported that the servers had stopped working. Gaku immediately went to investigate and was shocked to discover that the security system had been breached. All the company's information stolen, yet he could find no trace of the intruder. The company was officially on the brink of collapse. At that moment, Haru was summoned to meet with the D.R.A.M.A president. He told Haru that if he wanted to save the company, he should kneel and beg for help. Otherwise, the Trillion Games company would surely be wiped off the map. This left Haru deep in thought, as he did not want all the hard work of his friends to go to waste. He also didn't want to kneel before his enemy. At that moment, he didn't know what decision to make. The next day, due to a leak of customer information, Takahashi, in her capacity as president of the company, publicly apologized, and she announced that she would resign from the Trillion Games company. Before leaving, she urged Haru and Gaku to save the company. That prompted Haru to make his decision. He then went with Gaku and Kidoin to meet with the D.R.A.M.A president. Haru directly knelt and begged him for help. He offered to give up 42.5% of his shares, but with one condition. When joining D.R.A.M.A, he must be appointed a senior manager. The D.R.A.M.A president immediately agreed, and from that moment on, Haru became a part of D.R.A.M.A. Seeing this, Gaku felt extremely disappointed. He never expected to be betrayed by someone he trusted the most. Unable to bear the shock that Gaku turned and walked away. At that moment, Kidoin also sold 15% of his shares, bringing in 10 billion yen from an initial investment of only 30 million. With profits increasing over 300 times, he could now spend the rest of his life traveling around the world. The next day, Haru, as the manager of Dragon Company, directly brought a team to the former company to officially complete the merger, which making the Trillion Games company a subsidiary of the Dragon Group. This angered everyone, as they believed Haru was a traitor. Even Gaku also thought that, when having lost his company, he didn't want to continue either. He wrote a resignation letter but ultimately didn't have the courage to let go and tore it up instead. Just then, Haru unexpectedly appeared and handed Gaku a file. He then revealed the truth. This was evidence of criminal activity that he had gathered within D.R.A.M.A. It had never been made public because the D.R.A.M.A president had deliberately concealed it. Haru had agreed to give up his shares just to collect this information. Now they could work together to turn the tables. It was only then that Gaku truly understood Haru's intentions. The next day, according to their plan, Haru and the D.R.A.M.A president went out. Gaku taken the opportunity to disguise himself as a janitor and sneak into the president's office. He hacked into all of his data. It seemed that their plan seemed foolproof. But the next day at the meeting, the senior leader of Dragon had exposed them. It turned out there were hidden cameras in the room. It had recorded Gaku's entire break-in, just when it seemed their plan had failed. But at that time, Haru stood up to reveal the truth. Haru announced that in today's meeting, he would fire the president. It seemed unreasonable, because to make this happen, Haru needed at least 51% of the shares of Dragon Bank. He then explained that Keidoan's round-the-world trip was just a cover. The real purpose was to collect shares from foreign investors in Dragon Bank. Keidoan had now returned with 16% of the shares in hand. At that moment, the Dragon president felt smug, because Haru still needed at least 35% more shares to turn the tables. Unexpectedly, that Haru stated that the president himself would give him 29%, because Haru had substantial evidence of the president's crimes. Gaku's intrusion into the computer wasn't just to gather information, it was to hack into the computer's camera to record the conversation, in which the president had threatened the leaders to engage in illegal activities. This left the Dragon president in utter despair, as all of his wrongdoings had been exposed. Now, if he didn't hand over the 29% of the shares, Haru would provide the video to the police. Then he would land the president in prison. Driven to desperation, the president had no choice but to comply. However, even with that, Haru still needed 6% more shares. Coincidentally, that these shares were held by Kokuryu. To protect her father from imprisonment, she willingly relinquished those shares. Haru now had a total of 51% of the shares, allowing him to fire the wicked president. But Haru gave all the control to Gaku. Since Haru was also guilty of leaking information and manipulating shares, it made him impossible to be the company's president. On the other hand, Gaku was completely innocent and qualified to run the company. From now on, Gaku would hold all the power. Shortly thereafter, the media buzzed with news about the victory of the Trillion Games company, which had turned the tables to take over the entire Dragon Group. Keeping his promise to Takahashi, Haru and Gaku successfully retained the company. They then went to bring her back to work, while Kokuryu was appointed as the president of the subsidiary Dragon. However, at this moment, Haru mysteriously disappeared. No one was able to contact him, until 2 years later, when Gaku was out buying drinks. Suddenly, he accidentally dropped a coin, and out of nowhere, someone jumped up to catch it. It turned out to be none other than Haru, who had returned, much to Gaku's joy. Before they could talk, Haru pulled Gaku into a supercar and drove him straight to the port, where their next plan would begin. This is the end of our movie. Thank you, and see you again in the next film.